This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
So this is continuing our coverage of Christmas cases. Have you caught up with the Delphi stuff that's going on?
I've seen what's happening, but I don't know that an actual connection has been made.
For people who maybe haven't been following, this is the case of the murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German from February 14th of 2017. So not a Christmas case, but it's had a flurry of activity where authorities were asking for information related to a social media account under the name Anthony Shots. The mainstream media linked it to a guy out of Indiana, but the idea was that maybe this is a catfishing account. Essentially, what you see is not what you get related to this account.
Yeah, not at all, especially if it's Keegan Anthony Klein, who has been
posited as possibly linked.
Right. And so at first, they did everything they possibly could to confuse it as much as possible. Because
it really did make a mess, didn't it?
As I realized, they said that they were looking for anybody who may have had contact with somebody, and he was using the pictures of a known model. You know, the screen name was Anthony_Shots, like you said. And so they said anybody who has had contact with this person, specifically, I believe, like on Snapchat, offers to meet with him in person. They were looking for witnesses, basically, people who had interacted with this guy pretending to be this, cute model guy. And they wanted to talk to them. But they specifically linked it to the Delphi case.
Yeah, they linked it to it and they mentioned it. So I guess the news media went digging.
Well, I have to say, I immediately made several connections that I realized I made them myself. Nobody, and so I wasn't necessarily operating on complete truthful fact, right? Because I thought, oh, well, if it's related to the Delphi, they must have evidence. Now, I want to point out this guy's house was searched 11 days after the girls were found. Okay.
Correct.
So I'm thinking that they have some circumstantial evidence and they're trying to see if they can find witnesses that would get them up over what they need for a conviction.
Yeah, because what's interesting about what you just said, I've never seen anything like this. And as you said, if more confusion could be made of this, I don't know how they would make it more confusing. So they come out, this is 2021, this is December of 2021. They come out and they say, we're looking for anyone who can help us with this Anthony Shots profile, this online profile. If you go backwards, in a probable cause affidavit from August 19, 2020, Anthony Shots is mentioned in a probable cause affidavit charging Keegan Anthony Klein, who is currently 27, of using this fake social media profile to solicit underage females to obtain nude photos, which is based on an ongoing investigation that has a search warrant all the way back in February of 2017. That's a really long time.
It is. And I believe the media, the pictures or whatever, because he's being held on child pornography charges, I believe. And the data they found during that search was even older.
Yeah, it's interesting because so Keegan Anthony Klein According to Indiana court records, here I'll pull up I'll just read off the list of charges that are pending against him from the perspective of his charges, not related to Delphi. He has charges of child exploitation with the intent to arouse or satisfy the sexual desires of any, possession of child pornography with an aggravating factor, possession of child pornography, obstruction of justice, knowingly or intentionally obstructing an official proceeding, possession of child pornography, possession of photos showing sexual conduct, child exploitation, dissemination, exhibiting or offering to do so, sending or bringing, child exploitation enhanced by an aggravating factor found in 3542-4-4C1, synthetic identity deception, defined as knowingly obtaining, possessing, or transferring or using an identity not your own, child exploitation, dissemination to exhibiting, exhibitioning, or offering to do so, sending or bringing to, and child solicitation for sexual intercourse, defendant 21 years or older. So these are the charges that he's facing in the state of Indiana. These are all pending felony charges. You can find them pretty easily.
And he's in jail. He's been in jail since August, right?
Yeah, he's been in jail since August.
Of 2020.
Of 2020, which is why it's so weird. When I go hunting for him, like I poke through his social media briefly just because sadly in these larger cases, even though we don't cover them here, I can't not look. I was pretty confused actually by stuff that is now pretty public as far as the media goes. He has a long list of things listed as jobs. First of all, it says that he currently lives in Manitou Springs, Colorado. Says that he's a business owner and engineer at Area 52 Marijuana Delivery, that he's an armed security guard at Lockheed Martin. He's a former armed security guard at the National Park Service. He was a table games dealer at Wynn Las Vegas, and he was a former bail agent at Vegas Bail Bonds in Las Vegas, and a former table games dealer at California Hotel and Casino, and that he studied at UNLV. He says he's in a relationship. And then it says he's from Galveston, Indiana, and that he is a musical artist. But it also says that he moved to Spokane, Washington in June of 2019. What I found interesting was when I scrolled through all of his social media and all of this nonsense, he has several things that sort of look like he is saying them on social media solely for the purpose of providing himself an alibi. I don't know what to think of that. I don't have any idea what this kid is up to or what in the world he may or may not have been doing. But I think what I told you was, like, I wondered if this is not a catfish situation where I think originally what I said, it was maybe a catfish situation where someone threatened to turn him in, and you said, what if they just laughed at him?
Well, right, because I was thinking, and this is all the things that, like, I jumped to the conclusions, right?
Yeah.
Nothing has been put out there. But I do think that either the investigators in this case are really, really good or they're really, really bad. So we'll, I guess, figure that out if the case ever closes. But I was thinking to myself that it makes a whole lot more sense if they went out to that park to meet somebody. So one of them was meeting him and the other one was going so they wouldn't be alone, so they'd be safe, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, if they're expecting that model guy and then the guy that has been said in the probable cause affidavits to have been using that same screen name, if he showed up, they would have laughed at him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't think they would have, I don't think they would have been afraid of him at all. And I think that it makes it like, so while the person is still a stranger and clearly it takes a little bit of the randomness out of it though. Because, you know, it wasn't something they should have done for sure. But I'm not saying, we don't even know for sure that this is what has happened. But in my mind, I'm able to process it a lot better thinking that it was this catfish situation that they sort of went willingly into. And I'm not saying it's their fault. I'm just saying, like, it wasn't a random person at a park while they were out walking, right?
Right.
It's different because of that. And it seems to me like I have never understood this investigation. I think we've talked about it off and on as little things have happened because we're never going to be covering it completely. But it seems like every time they do something with the case, I'm more confused. And so I thought maybe it was because it was a current case that, it's the girls aren't missing. They've been found and, they were killed. And there wasn't a whole lot to go off of, but I think there was a whole lot more to go off of than we knew about. The fact that they finally made arrest referencing things that had occurred following a search warrant with regard that had to do with the murders 3 years later, that's so crazy to me.
Yeah, it is really weird.
I can't figure out like what's happening there because, unless I didn't actually read, I don't know if I read any of it, but I at least didn't read the whole probable cause affidavit for his arrest. And it seemed to me like what I saw, it would have been just as arrestable the day they searched.
I have no idea what is going on with this kid. Yeah. I'm genuinely confused by everything that's coming out about him. And it's not, okay, just so we're clear, what happened to him in his arrest is not deliberately linked to the Delphi murders by the authorities. This is by the media.
Right, but the search was conducted having to do with the Delphi case. It was 11 days after it. Actually, you know what? I don't know that for certain, but I got every single impression that the reason they searched his abode at that time was something reviewed in the murder case led them there. Yes.
Okay. So here's what I have. You mind if I read some of this?
No, go ahead.
Okay. And there's a lot of redactions here, just so we're clear on that. This is a filed document from the Indiana courts on August 19, 2020. The trooper's name is David Vito. So he says, he's swearing out an affidavit. If you don't know what that looks like, he's basically he's outlining for a judge the reason he's doing something, and this is what he says. I, Trooper David Vito of the Indiana State Police Department, PE 8923, being first duly sworn upon oath, says that on February 25th, 2017, in the county of Miami, the state of Indiana, at Canal Street in Peru, Indiana, say the following. He has a list of 6 ICs. And ICs, I guess, are the Indiana codes, but it's what I said earlier, the different solicitation charges, etc. It says the undersigned says, on February 25th, 2017, the Indiana State Police, or the ISP, and the Federal Bureau of Investigations, FBI, executed a search warrant at a redacted address while working an ISP case number that's redacted. The FBI sent information to the ISP Cybercrimes Unit that an adult male was soliciting female juveniles utilizing the social media platforms Snapchat and Instagram. The adult male was using the username Anthony_Shots. Subpoenas were sent to Instagram and Snapchat for the Anthony_Shots account information. The Instagram and Snapchat returns provided Comcast IP addresses. A subpoena was sent to Comcast for the IP address associated with the account, and they returned to this address, and it's redacted, Peru, Indiana. The Instagram subpoena advised the Anthony Shots account was registered on July 20th of 2016. The Snapchat was registered on July 14th, 2016. On February 25th, the search warrant was executed on the residence by ISP, FBI, and the Peru Police Department. A redacted name and his son, Keegan Anthony Klein, were located in the residence at approximately 12:35 p.m. Dad was interviewed by ISP Sergeant Kunstick and FBI Special Agent Willman. He was read his rights, agreed to speak with investigators, confirmed they had Comcast as an internet provider and that it was a secured network. He told investigators that Keegan used Instagram and Snapchat. At approximately 1:25 p.m., Keegan Klein was interviewed by ISP Kunstick and FBI Special Agent Willman. Keegan was read his rights. He agreed to speak with investigators. During Keegan's interview, he initially denied creating fake social media accounts and talking to underage girls. Later in the interview, he admitted to creating the Anthony Shots profile and speaking to underage girls. He told investigators he created the accounts approximately 6 months ago, and he stated he talks to girls he knows personally and girls that he doesn't know. He stated he meets the girls on Instagram. He said he knows the age of the girls he communicates with because he talks to them. He stated if a girl told him she was 16 or under, he wouldn't care. He would talk to them anyways. He then told investigators he finds girls on Instagram. He tells them to talk to him on Snapchat. So he basically is moving over to this. He's taking them to a second location just digitally. He admits to speaking to approximately 15 girls that were underage and advised he probably received pictures from every one of them. He saved their pictures to his gallery on his phone. During the interview, Keegan stated he was fucked and he should have left. He advised he packed another bag and he took it to Las Vegas. Dad and Keegan returned from Las Vegas on February 25th, 2017. He stated that he was going to leave when his dad was asleep. Keegan told investigators the main phone that he uses is a white iPhone 5C. After his interview, he was polygraphed at the state police post by Sergeant Matthew Collins. Keegan and Collins spoke about this incident and case. Keegan again admitted to creating the fake Anthony Shots profiles and speaking to underage girls. He told Sergeant Collins the girls ranged from 15 to 17 years old. He knew their ages because they told him how old they were. He stated that he received approximately 100 sexual pictures from underage girls, describing sexual pictures as bare breasts, vaginas, butts, and girls in bras and panties. Keegan also advised he received approximately 20 videos of underage girls masturbating. Keegan stated he would masturbate to the pictures and videos they sent him. He also communicated this to the girls who were sending the pictures and videos. His polygraph questions were based on this case number that's redacted. Keegan's polygraph was concluded at approximately 7:30 p.m. He was transported back to his residence. The undersigned has watched the interview and the polygraph recordings of Keegan Klein. Multiple electronic devices were seized during the warrant, including an iPhone 4, an iPhone 3, a Samsung Galaxy X5, a Samsung Galaxy S4, a Nextbook tablet, and an Apple iPad Touch. On February 27, 2017, Keegan contacted the cybercrimes unit, told him he located the iPhone 5C that wasn't taken, and the unit obtained the iPhone 5C from the ISP Peru Post. On April 24, 2020, I was assigned as a lead investigator for this case. This references the original trooper that I was talking about. On Friday, June 12, 2020, you see the gap there?
Yeah.
February 27, 2017, and then April 24, 2020. On Friday, June 12th, I received the digital forensic examination from ISP Sergeant Chris Cecil. I reviewed the information, and below is a summary of the forensic exam. On Thursday, June the 18th, multiple law enforcement officials met with the Miami County prosecutor to discuss this investigation. Apple iPhone 4. This iPhone was named Keegan's iPhone, was last utilized November 11th, 2016. Keegan would have been 22 years old. Access to the phone was protected by a PIN code. There are numerous user names and email addresses located on this phone, and then they redact a lot of information there related to those usernames and email addresses. The user of this device communicated with female teens and shared media files depicting child abuse material. The user portrayed themselves as a female teen using the names Emily Ann 45. Many of the communications were recovered from Kik and Snapchat. Media artifacts were found on this device. There were multiple child abuse materials and erotic media files, which the user had saved on the device or shared. Child abuse materials depicted female children, approximately 12 to 17, posing nude, partially nude, or performing sex acts on themselves. There were files located depicting children between the ages of 3 and 11 in a sex act with an adult. There were also still images showing possible drugs and images showing Keegan with a black handgun. On May 14, 2016, there was a discussion that involved the user of the iPhone and another party sharing Dropbox public links containing the child abuse materials and child erotica media files. The user of the iPhone portrayed themselves as Emily Ann 45. The user had used the Emily Ann identity in 2015. Then there's several pages of Kik chats with a redacted additional user indicating that they have recovered the information of this Emily Ann from this iPhone 4. So this is someone alleged to be Keegan, essentially having messenger chats with someone who is unidentified. And it says age unknown, name unknown, all of that if you scroll through. So it's pages and pages in this affidavit that they have blacked out. But you just from that little bit I read at the beginning, you get a pretty good idea of what is going on. And when I say pages and pages, there are at least 40 pages of redacted Kik messenger. Like they're on here, but then someone has gone over it and redacted the identifying information and the content of the chat as evidence. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Then they pull the Apple iPhone 3G on page 29. This iPhone was called Keggy, which is like spelled like Peggy, but with a K. Keggie. It was secured.
And smiley face, old style emoji.
Yeah. This device had not been used since May 23rd of 2015. There were no chat conversations from Skype or Kik, but the device did have evidentiary value in multiple still images depicting females posing nude or partially nude or performing sex acts. The ages of the females were indeterminate. Multiple user screen save captures of conversations were found, and in one screen capture, the sender specifically identifies the receiver as Keegan. The user saved over 200 still images on this device, which contain metadata and location data embedded into the file. Approximately 27 of the still images depicted females who appeared to be at least 14 years of age or older. Some of these images depict nude female breast or genitalia, and some of these 27 images were geolocated in Indiana cities, including Bunker Hill, Galveston, Indianapolis, Kokomo, Monterey, and Royal Center. And they recovered a web history from this device that is then redacted. The next device they talk about is a Samsung Galaxy S5. This phone was named Klein Photography, and it had a factory reset performed on it on approximately February 23rd, 2017. It says that Keegan would have been 22 years old at this time. The device was not secured with a password or a PIN code. There were numerous usernames and email addresses redacted from this device, but there were chat messages recovered from this device from MeetMe, Facebook Messenger, and Snapchat. Conversations that took place between February 23rd, 2017 and February 25th, 2017 discussed meeting people in Las Vegas and prostitution. And then there are a ton of basically internet web searches that are redacted, and they state outright that there's pornography on it, but it's not child abuse materials necessarily. There was a Samsung Galaxy S4 that was collected, and it had last been utilized on approximately June 25th, 2015. The forensic analysis showed that the device was powered on multiple days after this date, but it was not used. Keegan would have been 21 years old at this time. This device was secured by a swipe puzzle pattern and a PIN code. And again, they have a list of multiple usernames and email addresses located on this phone. There are many chat conversations recovered from this particular device, and several of those conversations appeared to be with a female team that was representing themselves as being between 12 and 13 years old. The user also used two profiles, Keegan Klein and Emily Ann. And then in parentheses here, it says that is Keegan's stepsister and that those profiles have been communicating with female teens. Conversations were found on this device where Emily was discussing how she had sex with Keegan and his father at the same time. There were multiple child abuse, sexual materials, and erotic media files found saved on this device. The way that the files were named indicated that the images were captured by screenshot and or received from Snapchat or Skype. Many of them depicted female children, approximately 12 to 17 years old, who were posing nude, partially nude, performing sex acts on themselves. There were more still images depicting possible drugs and paraphernalia found on this device. Then we get to the Nextbook Premium tablet. This user device is unknown and was last utilized on March 9th, 2016. Keegan would have been 21 years old at this time. This device was secured with neither a password or a PIN code. There were numerous email addresses and usernames on this device, and there were numerous chat conversations recovered from this device. The user of the device used multiple communication platforms, including Facebook, Facebook Messenger, Kik Messenger, MeetMe.com, Skype, and Snapchat. The user of this device initiated conversations on Facebook Messenger and asked or suggested that conversations move to Kik or Snapchat. There's nothing here. Everything underneath that is basically a Celebrate description that they have gone through and highlighted, redacted.
So why do you think that they did this?
Why they think they did what?
Well, it looks to me like of course, we can't speculate. I mean, we could, but it's pointless to speculate on what's redacted. But some of the timing seems to show that, there was a flurry of activity that occurred right after the murders. And, one of the phones had been, the Samsung had been reset.
Yeah, so they get to the last devices. There's an Apple iPod Touch that really hasn't been used since 2015. The one that's of interest is the Apple iPhone 5C. And in your document that I gave you, it's page 33. Mm-hmm. It says that this device was named Keegan's phone. The phone was turned into the Indiana State Police. It was last utilized on 2/27/2017. Keegan would have been 22 years old at the time. The device is secured with a PIN code, numerous usernames and email addresses. The user of this device used Facebook, Instagram, MeetMe, Snapchat, and Twitter to communicate or chat. Much of this device's data, like the application data, had been deleted. The examinations found multiple still images depicting females that were nude, partially nude, or clothed, and whose ages were indeterminate. At approximately 2/27/2017, so February 27, 2017, which is what I think you're getting at 9:48 in the morning, the user cleared or deleted the Safari web browser history and the website data from this device. During the examination, some information was recovered, and it said below is a sample of the terms the user searched, and they have redacted those terms. My guess is this is the connection there.
Well, that's what I was thinking too, because and so
they conclude this report. You mean read out the conclusion, then we can talk about it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is the conclusion. This is in 2020. While looking over the Digital Forensic Examination report from 2020, I noticed the user of the Apple iPhone 5C deleted multiple items off the phone before turning it into law enforcement. On February 25th, 2017, the search warrant was served on the client's residence, and Keegan was interviewed and polygraphed. On February 27th, 2017, he called the Indiana State Police to turn in the Apple iPhone 5C. On February 25th, 2017, at approximately 7:30 p.m., Keegan's polygraph was concluded. He was transported back to his residence. The Digital Forensics Examination report shows that at approximately 9:19 p.m., the user of the iPhone 5C started to uninstall and delete apps from the phone. At approximately 9:19 p.m., the user uninstalled and deleted Snapchat. At approximately 10:14 p.m., the user uninstalled and deleted Instagram. On February 26, 2017, at approximately 1:12 p.m., the user uninstalled and deleted Meet Me from the phone. The user put Snapchat back on the device. And on February 27, 2017, at approximately 1:28 p.m., the user again uninstalled and deleted it from the phone. Keegan admitted to using these applications to chat with underage girls. The evidence contained in these applications was destroyed when the user deleted them from the device before turning it into law enforcement. Law enforcement officers observed Keegan staying at his girlfriend's apartment on August 14th and 15th of 2020, located at a redacted address. Due to the aforementioned probable cause, I'm requesting this investigation be reviewed for consideration of the charges, and those are the charges I read out at the beginning. And then it's signed Trooper David Vito, and he affirmed under penalties of perjury that the foregoing representations were true. And then here, what's weird, is he references that redacted Indiana State Police incident, which is the 17 ISP C002202. So this is what people are saying links this guy to Delphi. The Anthony Schatz profile.
Is that the case number?
This is the Indiana State Police incident report is one. I don't know if this is Delphi.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. And
it's certainly from 2017.
And at least through mainstream media, they're asking for anybody who interacted with this dude to contact them.
Correct.
The Anthony _Schatz, especially people who might have been asked to meet him. So clearly here,
it's a little crazy, right?
Yeah, it is. But I can also see where they need more information. First thing is, like, why did it take so long? Most of this information they had on the 25th of February of 2017.
Are you asking me?
Well, I'm saying it sort of rhetorically because it shouldn't have taken this long. For what he's been arrested for, like, all that stuff was on his computer the first time. Now, I still didn't quite hear, like, why the initial search warrant for the house. Let's see. It was issued because the Indiana State Police and Federal Bureau of Investigations had worked with the cyber crimes of Indiana State Police. They were looking into a mail using Anthony _Schatz that the IP address for Comcast came back to the address that he lived at with his father. So how did they start looking into that to begin with? It has to have to do, they must have had something on the phone.
Okay, are you saying how is it linked to Delphi or how is it linked to what I just read?
Okay, no, I'm saying that on February 25th, 2017, for some reason, there was information floating around and different, the Indiana State Police and the FBI were working a lead to something where they found that through Snapchat and Instagram, they found an IP address from Comcast that was linked to Anthony _Schatz that led them to the Klein residence, right?
Yeah, it's somebody reported him basically as soliciting their kid. That's what happened, I think.
You don't think that the Anthony _Schatz was on one of the girls' phones?
It could be.
Because
it's the right timing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, to me, it would be, especially when he is like, he makes some comments about basically he's screwed himself over. Those are weird comments to be making, don't you think? He's like, I packed a bag, I was going to leave when my dad was sleeping or something. And I think it's pretty clear he didn't actually start that job since he was at home on the 25th, right?
Yeah, I think his world is BS.
I wondered in my opinion, I think they found something on the girls' phones. Didn't they? They found their phone because that's how we know Bridge Guy.
Either found the phone or they found something in the cloud. One or the other. I don't know how usable the phones were, but yes, that is how we have bridge guys, either directly from the device or the cloud. I don't think they've specified.
And because of the timing, I would say that I bet there was some indication that one of the girls had communicated with this username.
I would say that's a good bet, yeah.
And that's how that all got started. So I do think that initially was why it started all that, because I get where somebody could have turned him in, but it takes a whole lot more than mentioning it to the police to get a real investigation going. Don't you think?
Yeah.
Like 2 girls being murdered. I mean, that would do it. But so then it makes me wonder, could they just not go any further with it? Like, I'm confused as to why it's 3 years later. And
there's a big gap in there where basically, and I pointed it out when I came to it, it's on page 2 of the probable cause, but basically everything gets submitted in 2017, and then that report's not really dealt with until April 2020.
Do you think it's because they can't make heads or tails of any of it?
I have a real specific thought that is hard to articulate in a way that isn't going to get me in trouble. Let me see if I can try. I'll try U.S. questions. I believe there could be a suspicion that it's not just Keegan.
Okay.
And I don't know where that goes from there. I don't know if there's a friend or a relative or some other person who also engages in behavior like Keegan.
Well, I would say that there had to have been something pretty good to indicate it wasn't him at the time that they did the search warrant on his house, which was 11 days after.
But they weren't searching for Keegan.
No, they were searching for a person using the username that was associated with the IP address at his residence.
Right. We don't necessarily know that is Keegan.
Well, it seems like they probably found evidence on the phones that linked him specifically to it with all the charges. They don't really close that gap. I agree.
I'm not necessarily saying they didn't find evidence that it is Keegan. I'm saying what makes that gap
in time?
Yeah. Is that they don't know for sure that it's Keegan. There's other people in the home that they can't quite figure out the difference.
That seems, so that's why they're looking for witnesses. They need more information. And, obviously this is clearly, anytime there's 3 years that go by and then they arrest. So all the evidence that they used, they describe in this warrant, it all came from the search and then him subsequently dropping off that other iPhone. So they searched on the 25th of February and then he handed over his main iPhone a couple days later. But all of the information that led to all these charges about child solicitation, etc., it all stemmed from that 2017 search. So there's nothing new.
There does not appear to be anything new.
And so when you have information that's 3 years old, that is, a new case agent gets assigned to it. And you can tell that he was just getting this guy locked up. Right.
It looks like he's just going through the motions. When I look at his timeline, when I just look at, he basically gets the case in April, and I think the kid's arrested in August. So
he waited for something that came back in June. But because I understand the fact that if he's behind bars for obstruction of justice and child solicitation and child pornography possession, he's behind bars, no less, right?
Correct.
Even though he might not necessarily be behind bars for murder, he's still behind bars, and it's something sort of concrete, it looks like. But then it makes me wonder, I'm concerned that my initial thoughts about this case, which is that nothing was happening with it, I'm concerned that actually was true.
With the Delphi case or with the case? here's like, so say everything that we're talking about right now is 100% accurate. This is what I would say. I would say that it's not that nothing was happening. It's that this case existed on a different plane than the investigators were expecting.
I cannot. How close is this? How close is he? Where he lives? How close is that
to Delphi?
Yeah.
So if I run just the addresses I have available, it's within 30 minutes.
Okay, so you've got information that, like you said, we're assuming all this is. I would assume everything in the affidavit is at least believed to be true, right? It's not just speculation. They've got some facts. Like you said, it could have possibly been somebody else in the house or something, right? But for the most part, it adds up to, I would say that finding out that Anthony _Shots was baiting girls on social media platforms in various ways, and then having, it doesn't discuss if he actually met up with any of them, but he talks pretty openly about trying to meet up with them, right? And so the fact that, that name comes up, they search his house 11 days after the girls are found, and he's that close to them. To me, this is the biggest lead, is it not?
It's a pretty big lead, yeah.
I can't imagine anything else being bigger, and yet he was out walking around free until August of 2020.
It's going to be weird if they end up arresting him for this.
When they had the information all along to at least arrest him on these, to me, they're serious. They're not murder, but, child solicitation, obstruction of justice. They had that evidence all along, but he was out on the street. And so you and I briefly discussed it when there was another arrest of a guy who had his neighbor's daughter in his basement. Remember?
Yeah.
And I had said at that point, like, it really seemed to me like nothing was happening with this case. And I think you and I kind of jointly came to the conclusion, well, maybe that's just how it is when, it's an open, active investigation. And I was like, okay, well, maybe so. But I'm afraid I was right. Like, I'm afraid that I don't like hearing that this type of thing has occurred.
Well, I rant and rave all the time about these type situations where I think all the information should have been public, but that doesn't mean this would have been public.
They don't have to make it public. They should have arrested this guy on the charges of the evidence that they found right when they found it. They don't have to make the information public. I don't care.
I don't know why
that.
They didn't.
Well, that's my point. Nothing new came up. And yet he was arrested like 3.5 years later, or however long it was, when they had everything they needed to arrest him on these particular charges 11 days later. I hope to God he did not kill anybody else, any other young girls in between those times.
That's going to be complicated. And I would say that it goes beyond killing, and it could be trafficking. They have these interesting, like what if he was planning on kidnapping them?
Well, I don't know. I don't know what his prerogative is, but he's a big old loser as far as I'm concerned. I feel like he did get it. So if he didn't do it, right?
This is terrible.
If he didn't do it, he recognized enough about the similarities between what he was doing and what potentially happened to these girls that he deleted Snapchat after he did a polygraph, right?
Yeah.
So he recognized enough about what was going on to think to himself, like, this is a bad idea, right?
Yeah.
Now, does that make him, guilty of murder? Well, no. And I have a feeling that's where the investigators kind of stalled out as well. At least we finally got this guy who was like, oh, well, we may not have enough evidence for the murder, but this is plenty of evidence for these other charges. Let's at least get him locked up.
Yeah.
And so, and it makes me sick because the case, if this is how it's really playing out, which maybe it's not, maybe we're just wrong. It really had stalled out. And when I said that, I felt like the case had stalled out, I was right, because it had. Because nobody was doing anything with the readily available information they had. They could have. Okay, so right now, as it stands, Libby and Abby's murder is still an unsolved mystery, basically, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but in theory, if this guy did it, they would have solved it in 11 days if they had done what it took to get him arrested and charged for it. Isn't that a huge deal?
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to end up being coincidental. Not under these circumstances, because now I've heard people say that the mugshot couldn't be Bridge Guy. I don't know if you've heard that or not. This is all like within. I mean, this happened, I think, yesterday.
He could totally be Bridge Guy. That mugshot's from.
Well, yeah, he could be Bridge Guy, and it was weird to me because it seemed like nobody would really like 100% say like, no, there's no way it's him, right? Because he's done shady stuff, and nobody can, completely back his character 100% and say there's no way he did this, which he's confessed to doing scenarios that it seems like we could, without being too fictional, stretch to figure out what happened to Libby and Abby, right? I mean, he meets up with a couple of girls that he's been talking to on Snapchat, and they laugh at him because he's not who he said he was, and he gets mad and kills them, right?
Right.
And so since he's already confessed to that type of behavior, he's so close, and then his actions at least made him conscious of what he was doing. That's a lot of coincidences.
I don't disagree with you. I find this whole story related to this fascinating. And, I'm a little surprised that we're able to just like reach out and find some of these documents sitting here.
So was there, I believe you sent me a press release, right?
When?
Yesterday about this, because it was like, you sent me like a or a law enforcement bulletin, maybe.
Yeah. So there's a law enforcement bulletin that has an accompanying video from the Indiana State Police, but it's not about Keegan Kline.
It's about Anthony _shots.
Correct.
And then, like, not even 12 hours, mainstream media identified him as Anthony _shots. And I know that it's been said like, hey, we didn't make any direct link here to the Delphi case. I don't know if you saw that or not. But so I was really confused because it was like, I don't know that law enforcement has, I would say that this affidavit sums it up because it does directly associate him with that account, right?
In my opinion, it does. I think that maybe law enforcement didn't realize that information was already out there. Or maybe they did.
I hope so, because if they were wanting to keep it secret, they probably should get a new ally with the whoever they deal with in mainstream media, because they didn't understand the direction. But somebody connected it immediately, right? It was fast. And then all of a sudden everybody, and maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe it's a genius way of leaking it to associate him with the murders, and they don't actually have enough evidence, to charge him, but they did this purposefully. Unfortunately, I feel like it's probably not the case, but I can always hope, right?
Yeah, all I did, it took me 2 seconds to find the probable cause affidavit and then to sort of start looking at what might be going on there. I'm not saying this is related at all. This goes back to the other one. I thought he was good for it too.
Right, but I felt like based on the composites, the other guy could have possibly been a good match because he looked like both of those like completely different looking composite drawings.
Yeah.
But this guy checks so many more boxes.
He does. He definitely does. And one of the problems with like situations like this is we're all just speculating. And
That's true, but this has quite a bit of concrete information that
correct. Exactly. So the other guy had concrete information about another case.
Right, but this seems to point at least to the general like time and place of the murders, and I am going to have to see something else that would make me think. I mean, I am speculating that the murders is what led them to ultimately searching his house based on the IP address coming back to it. But if I would need to see like proof of something else before I believed that it wasn't the murder.
I would not necessarily lean on Keegan Kline being the Delphi suspect, but possibly directly related to whatever's going on with the Delphi suspect. There's some other stuff I'm trying to run down. They redacted here, so I can't say it. But there's an interesting possibility that all the 50 million podcasters that are going to release an episode about this, maybe they will come up with something interesting. Because it's one of the things where I look at it and I'm just like, what is going on like behind the scenes?
Well, I noticed that in the flurry of information that was laid out in the affidavit, there's one mention on one of the mobile devices of him with a gun.
Right.
And, they've never, I don't think, you can correct me.
They have not released that information for causes of death.
But the fact that it's in the affidavit
means they were looking for it.
It makes me think that they were shot and killed. Yeah.
That would be more interesting information.
Right. But that was a very specific thing to, one, find on the phone, but also to specifically list in because I doubt that was all that was on there.
Well,
this is such a terrible case. We say we're not going to cover it, but then we do like these little like
hours and hours snippets of it. I know.
And I hope that I'm really
holy shit. We've done an hour on this.
It's more confusing. Like this case just boggles my mind because I've never felt like it was being worked on appropriately. And then we were like, oh, it's because it's open. But now I'm back to thinking like they're really just not doing anything.
Well, let's try and get a usable Christmas case out of this. This is terrible, but I'm sort of being serious. You had a list of cases you sent me you wanted to cover as the cases of Christmas. We were hoping we would be able to do like 12 of them. We don't know that for sure, but
well, if true crime news keeps happening, I don't think that's going to be possible because
there's so many things that I'm just ignoring right now in the true crime news arena. But I like to cover interesting things here and there related to it. But this case is not news at all. This case is 76 years old this year.
That's insane.
Yep. So you decided to send me something from December 24th of 1945. And I wanted to at least cover it from the perspective of, so I did a show in college, like a play that was about two brothers coming over to Red Hook, New York, from Italy. And the play has origins in 1955, and it has shades of possibly being related to this case. I don't know if you knew that or not, but it's called A View from the Bridge. It's an Arthur Miller play. I played one of the brothers that came over from Italy. I loved it. It was a great show. But this is about an Italian immigrant and his family. His name was Giorgio Sadu, and he came over from Tula, Sardinia. I'll get this. He came over from Tula, Italy, which is in Sardinia. He was born in 1895 in Tula, Sardinia, Italy. He immigrated to the U.S. 13 years later with an older brother. So in 1908, his older brother who had come with him, they clear customs at Ellis Island, and his brother goes home. So for the rest of his life, Giorgio, who came to be known as George Sodder instead of Giorgio Sadu, his birth name, he wouldn't talk about why he had left Italy. He eventually found work on the rail line in Pennsylvania. He would carry water and other supplies to workers. And after a few years, he ended up being a driver in Smithers, West Virginia. And a few years later, he started a construction trucking company to haul fill dirt to and from construction sites. And later on, he would, one of the things that West Virginia is known for is coal mining. He began to haul coal from the mines. Jenny Cipriani was a storekeeper's daughter in Smithers, and she was also an Italian immigrant who had come over in her childhood. And they met, and they fell into marriage. I don't know if it was love or not, but it was definitely marriage. So they settled outside of Fayetteville, West Virginia. And at that time, in the 1920s, the Fayetteville area had a large population of Italian immigrants. And they bought a little house outside of town. And in 1923, they started having kids because George's business was doing pretty good as he was hauling coal mining gear and coal around. They were considered to be like a pretty well-respected family. And George had like really strong opinions about a lot of things. He was not shy about expressing them, and he made some enemies through his business and through his mouth. In particular, he was a strident opponent of Benito Mussolini, who was the Italian dictator at the time. And because the area was a pretty big immigrant community, this caused them some trouble. The last of the Sodders' children was born in 1943. This would be Sylvia. And by then, their second oldest son, Joe, had left home to serve in the military during World War II. What happened with the Italians during this time is Mussolini gets executed. And even though this happens, and George is right for criticizing him in his mind, some local people did not care for George's opinion. And in October of 1945, George got into it with a visiting life insurance salesman who also happened to be Italian. And that life insurance salesman allegedly said to him that his house was going to go up in smoke and his kids were going to be destroyed. His entire family was going down, attributing it to the way that George staunchly opposed Mussolini. But there was another visitor to the house who came, and the story goes that they were there because they wanted to work as a hauler, a driver, or a lumper, meaning loading the trucks. They had gone around the back of the house and had knocked on the door. And when they ended up talking to George, that person said that there was a pair of fuse boxes back there that could cause a fire. George was puzzled by this observation. He had just had the whole house rewired to have an electric stove installed. And the local electric company had signed off on it being safe. In the weeks before Christmas that year, George's older sons were reported to have noticed a strange car parked along the main highway in town, and its occupants seemed to be watching the younger Sodder children as they returned home from school. The Sodders were celebrating Christmas Eve in 1945, and Marion, the oldest daughter, had been working at the dime store in downtown Fayetteville. She surprised three of her younger sisters, Martha, who was 12, Jenny, who was 8, and Betty, who was 5, with new toys that she had bought them for gifts. The younger children were so excited that they asked their mother if they could stay up past what would have been their usual bedtime. At 10 p.m., Jenny, mom, told them they could stay up a little later as long as the oldest two boys who were awake which is 14-year-old Maurice and 9-year-old Louis, as long as they remembered to put the cows in and feed the chickens before they went to bed themselves. George and the two oldest boys, which is John, who was 23 at the time, and George Jr., who was 16, they had spent the day working with their father, and they were already asleep. Jenny reminded the children of their remaining chores, and she took Sylvia, who was 2 years old, upstairs, and they went to bed together. The telephone rang at 12:30 a.m., and Jenny woke and went downstairs to answer it. The caller was a woman whose voice that she did not recognize and supposedly asked for a name she was not familiar with. In the background, she could hear the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Jenny told the caller she'd reached the wrong number, and the woman laughed. Jenny hung up and went back to bed. As she did so, she noticed that the curtains were not drawn yet, were not closed. The lights were still on, and that these were things that the kids normally did when they stayed up later than their parents. Marion had fallen asleep on the living room couch, so Jenny assumed the other children who had stayed up later had gone up to the attic where they slept. She closed up the curtains, turned out the lights, and she went to bed. At 1 a.m., Jenny was again awakened by the sound of an object hitting the house's roof with a loud bang and then a rolling sound. Hearing nothing further, she went back to sleep. But about 20 to 30 minutes later, she woke up again, smelling smoke. When she got up again, she found that the room that George used for his office was on fire. It was around the telephone line and the fuse box. So Jenny woke him, and in turn, he woke up his older sons. Both parents and 4 of their children, Marion, Sylvia, who is the youngest, John, and George Jr., escaped the house. They frantically yelled to the children upstairs, but they heard no response. And they could not go up there because the stairway itself was on fire. In the first police interview, John, this is the 23-year-old, he told the police that after the fire, he went up to the attic to alert his siblings sleeping there. But he changes this story and says he called up there, but he didn't see them. Efforts to find, aid, and rescue the children were unexpectedly complicated. One, the phone didn't work because of the fire. Mary had gone to a neighbor's and called the fire department. A driver on a nearby road had also seen the flames, and he had called from a nearby tavern. No one could reach them because the phone turned out to be broken there. So they could not reach an operator either. So eventually, either the neighbor or the passing motorist was successful in reaching the fire department from another phone in town. George climbed up the wall up the side of the house, and he broke open the attic window and cut himself. His intention had been for him and his sons to use a ladder to get into the house and rescue the other children, but they couldn't find the ladder. It wasn't in its usual spot resting against the house, and they couldn't find it anywhere nearby. A water barrel that would have been used to extinguish the fire had frozen. George then tried to pull both of the trucks that he used in his business up to the side of the house and use them to climb to the attic window, but neither of them would start, even though they had been working perfectly the previous day. So the 6 sodders who had escaped had no choice but to watch the house burn down and collapse over the next 45 minutes. Their assumption was that the other 5 children had perished in the blaze. So there's 11 family members total. The fire department, which was low on manpower because there was a war going on, World War II, they were relying on individual firefighters to basically make a calling chain and to call each other, but they didn't respond until later that morning. And Chief Morris, who was the fire chief in town, said that the next day the already slow response was hampered because he could not drive the fire truck. He had to wait until someone who could drive was available. The firefighters, one of those was Jenny's brother, by the way, could do little but watch as as it continued burning down and then sift through the ashes afterwards. By 10 a.m., Chief Morris told the Sodders they had not found any bones, as they might have expected if the other children had been in the house if it had burned. And according to another account, they did find a few bone fragments, and they found internal organs, but they chose not to tell the family. It's also been noted that their search was not the best search. It was quick, and they were really just looking to see if any of the children could be found. But Morris believed that the 5 children who were unaccounted for had died in the fire, suggesting that the fire had been hot enough that it would have it would have cremated the bodies.
I would say that their investigation would probably have been on, I don't know any of these people, obviously. It probably would have been about on par with their response time to the fire.
Yeah, like they didn't really know what they were doing.
Well, yeah, it took them 7 hours to get there, and the fire chief couldn't drive the fire truck. Like,
it's a really sad case. They do end up issuing death certificates for the children on December 30th. If you read the newspaper articles in this case, like for the Fayetteville area, they're very confusing. Some of them state that the bodies were found. Others state that a part of one body was found. But overall, you don't get a good sense that whether or not the bodies are found or the firefighters are just sort of pacifying the family, trying to give them hope for some reason.
Right. And, or they didn't want to expose them to the like grisly reality, because it seems like, I don't know if the firefighters were volunteer or not, but it clearly wasn't a efficient operation. And, that could be really hard to deal with, thinking about that many children at once. I know that the father had been told by some authority, I'm not sure if it was, fire or maybe law enforcement, to not disturb the scene just yet. And he couldn't stand the sight of it, and he bulldozed to make it flat, I guess. And so I imagine, and that was like within the first few days after the fire. And so I think that probably didn't help.
Yeah, they waited for the fire marshal for 4 days, and then they bulldozed it. The official ruling that was the result of a coroner's inquest, which is slightly different than a lot of what maybe should have been done here, was that the fire was an accident caused by faulty wiring, and that the 5 children had died in the fire.
I don't really see why a coroner would hold an inquest to determine the cause of the fire, but whatever.
I don't know why he did. It was convened.
That's weird, isn't it?
It was a little weird.
I mean, I could see it if he wanted. Maybe they just had to present the case as to whether or not there's enough evidence that the children have perished.
Yeah, I think it was in order for the death certificates to be issued. That's what they were doing there.
Right. So had you heard of this case before?
No, I hadn't heard of it before, and I had not actually read up on it. When I look at this case, I do believe that those kids likely died in that fire, and so the family brought up a lot of things afterwards where they had questions about different things that could happen. There does seem to be some paranoia attached to this case, that it was some kind of retribution fire-wise. What did you think of it? Have you read this before?
Yes, I was familiar with it beforehand. I feel like, so what kind of unfolds is like denial, I think is a good word for it.
It's the stages of grief.
The parents, they became determined to figure out their children's fate. They posted what would be considered a billboard. Of course, this is 1945. So, but basically it's like, where are our children? Like, were they murdered? Are they still alive? And, it was there forever, basically, at the spot, I believe, where the house used to stand, because they just became convinced that there was no way their children had died in the fire, because, like, different things. They didn't find their bones or any indication of, their bodies. And they said that nobody heard them crying out, like, while the house was burning down.
Yeah, it started with that, and then they were saying that the Christmas lights had remained on throughout the fire's early stages, whereas if it was an electrical problem, they felt like the lights would have gone out.
I just want to point out that it was like a coroner's inquest jury that decided that it was faulty. I mean, I'm just saying, like, you got to consider the source, right?
Oh, I totally agree with you on that. I'm just, like, if we go pick everything apart from 75 years ago, we would find a lot of problems.
Right. And that's sort of the perspective they took it from. Now, granted, a lot of weird things did happen. Like, I imagine the lights were on and the door wasn't closed because the other kids had gone to bed and the oldest sister, Marion, was still downstairs. And they just assumed she was going to turn the lights off and close the door before she went upstairs, right?
Yeah.
And then now I have read, it seems like in several spots, and I think that what you were telling sort of went over it. There was information from the oldest son and brother, John, that like he knew that the kids were upstairs because he had actually tried to go upstairs and rouse them.
Yeah.
And he was unsuccessful in doing so. And I've seen further comments on it about how like he really wouldn't talk about it because he knew for certain that they were up there, and he carried a lot of guilt that, you know, he didn't do more to try and get them up. But I guess he was probably facing the choice of burning to death or getting out, right? I mean, I imagine that's how quick it was, but he did try to get them up. And so he just remained quiet. And then I think you said like, at first, he said that he had gone up and physically tried to rouse. I don't know if it was the boys or the girls, but the 5 children, he had tried to get them up. And then his story changed. And whatever I read about it, it made me think that he just didn't have the heart to dampen the hope that his parents had found in this, like, in coming up with all these strange scenarios that might have occurred. I do think it's weird that the phone rang in the middle of the night, but they eventually found the person who called, and it was genuinely a wrong number call. There was nothing, you know, nefarious about it at all. And then I don't know if you've ever had days where like, you're like, what else could possibly go wrong?
Yeah.
That was exactly what was happening there when the ladder wasn't where it was supposed to be. And then the trucks wouldn't crank, and then water was frozen. Yes, that's all that stuff is crazy, but I would imagine one of the kids is responsible for moving the ladder, right? Now, I don't know. It doesn't elaborate on how, you know, what was wrong with the trucks. Why wouldn't they crank? I imagine, and I don't know anything about cars, but I imagine it could have had something to do with how excited they were trying to, you know, get the kids out. Maybe they flooded the engine.
Yeah, that's one of the possibilities that was mentioned as well.
That would just be my guess. But I know that a lot of times when you're operating on the adrenaline mode, it's really hard to think straight. And this is one of the most tragic things ever. It is completely tragic that 5 kids perished in the fire, but it's even more tragic that it went on and on and on and on for so long. Now,
there are still articles talking about this case as recently as last year.
Right. And so, you know, at this point, I believe all the siblings have passed away. And so it would be their children or grandchildren, family-wise, that would be left. But I think, I'm not so sure that there are many people who have lost 5 children on one night that could actually empathize with the parents here or even the siblings, right? And so I think everybody was just sort of like, well, okay, maybe you're right. But I think the grief became this insurmountable thing. And that this, you know, possibility that maybe they were alive was just the way that they were able to deal with it. And it's crazy because it seems like they would have found something. I 100% believe that people can burn up in fires and have nothing left.
Especially smaller people.
Right.
Including children.
And especially if it's an accidental fire, people think that people who have murdered someone, they're like, oh, I'll just burn up the body. And it's a lot harder to do than you think it is. Right.
Yeah.
But in the event of an accident, bodies can burn up. And I have to say that the fact that they showed up at 8 a.m. to put out the fire goes to show you that that's why they didn't find any remains in the fires, because that's how efficient they were.
We don't even know if they knew what to look for.
We don't. And then because the father was disheartened and, he dumped fill dirt, I imagine, and, he basically flattened everything. That didn't help. And I think that there was a lot of different things that happened. I think somebody tried to say they found an organ and it ended up being a beef liver. And, I think that person probably had good intentions.
There were several things like that. But I think for the most part, the bulk of the bodies were probably burned up here.
Would just be too much that anything else happened. And it's a shame that, they didn't realize that. But if that's what allowed them to get through it, then good for them, I guess. But it's to me, it's not a mystery. Those 5 children died in that fire that night, and it's tragic.
I agree with you. I don't think this is a mystery at all. I do think it's been interesting that the story stayed alive so long. And there's been a lot of references over the years to sightings of them. There were later excavations, and there was a continuing family investigation well into the 1970s. There have been some additional efforts after that, but Sylvia, the youngest of the family, she died earlier this year. She was in the house on the night that the fire happened, but she was essentially saved by her family. But she passed away in April of 2021, on April the 23rd. She was the last surviving member of the family that was there that night, but some of the grandkids still talk about it. Stacey Horn did a segment on the case for NPR on the 60th anniversary, which was back in 15 years ago in 2005, 16 years ago, I guess. She believed that the children's death were likely in the fire. What bothers me so much about it is the fact that people just think that a town that doesn't even have firefighters who can call each other in time to get over to their house and start working on it for hours might potentially have some residents who could somehow corral 5 children and no one see it.
It's a stretch.
Yeah,
and these weren't little tiny. They were small, but 5, I think 5 or 6 was the youngest one.
14.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. A 14-year-old could totally be I'm not going with you, or could yell, "Mom, Dad, save me," that kind of thing. If somebody was kidnapping them.
Yeah,
I feel like the reason that they didn't hear anything, they probably succumbed to smoke inhalation first. They were in the highest part of the house, right?
Yep.
And
they succumb to smoke inhalation. And if the house is burning down, I would say that the top portion, it's going to feed on the oxygen the available around them. Top portion is going to get some good heat, and they're still seeing ashes at 8 to 10 in the next morning. That's some really hot heat that's burning those kids.
Right, and I think they just burn up. And I would have to try and be grateful that, I didn't hear them screaming, because can you imagine how much worse that would be? I really feel like this was just a way that this family dealt with it. This is an insurmountable tragedy to know that, part of them got out and part of them didn't.
Yeah, the FBI at one point considered the possibilities of it being a interstate kidnapping. They got involved. They spent years looking into it, and eventually they just gave up because they didn't feel like there were leads to follow in the case. But there were, in 1949, there was an excavation done where George basically, he was losing it. He was losing his mind. So in August, he persuaded a guy named Oscar Hunter, who was a well-known pathologist out of Washington, D.C., to come and supervise a new search through the dirt at the house site. Now, this is the same dirt that he put over the house site 4 days after it happened. But after a very thorough search, they did find artifacts related to the children. They found coins, and then they found a dictionary. There were several small bone fragments that were unearthed. They were determined to have been human vertebrae, and the bone fragments were sent to Marshall T. Newman, who was a specialist at the Smithsonian Institution. He confirmed that they were lumbar vertebrae, all from the same person. And because of the way that the transverse recesses were fused, he estimated the age of the individual should have been around 16 or 17 years old. The top limit of the age should be about 22, since the Sintra, which normally fuse at the age of 23, were still unfused. Given this age range, it's not likely that everybody felt like it wasn't likely this was bones from any of the 5 missing children. The oldest, Maurice, had been 14 at the time, but it was admitted later and documented in the same report that vertebrae of a boy that age could sometimes be advanced enough to appear to be at the lower end of the range described. So it's quite possible that they found Maurice's bones. However, he did say that the bones themselves showed no sign of exposure to flame, which that's not necessarily a huge problem, because if the rest of the body is burned, it doesn't necessarily mean that the bones would be, because there's so much liquid in the body.
Well, not to mention, like, as much as I feel like the kids burnt up in the fire, I definitely don't feel like somebody murdered them and left them in the house to burn up in the fire.
Yeah, that would be even weirder. But the report concluded that the vertebrate had likely come from the dirt that George had used to bulldoze over the site.
It's unfortunate that they don't have it still, because they could DNA test it now.
At one point, it was determined that the bone fragments had come from a nearby cemetery in Mount Hope, but they couldn't explain how all of that had happened. And the Smithsonian in 1949 returned the bone fragments to George. The current location of the bones are unknown.
Right.
There are multiple sightings of the kids throughout the years that are all pretty futile. And there's even a photo that was sent to the family, I think, in the 50s. There was a picture sent from Central City, Kentucky, with no return address, that had a picture of a young man around 30 years old. And that photo is on the internet. But it was purported to be possibly a photo of Lewis as an adult. So sad. People fucked with these people for years. People hoaxed these people for years.
I would like to think that it wasn't messing with them or hoaxing them. But obviously, with no return address and no ability to follow up on it, you have to kind of think, well, they were messing with them. But it is unbelievably cruel to do something like that.
Yeah, that's like an early form of like terrible trolling, is what that is. And the truth is, this sort of falls on John for changing his story.
I think that the pressure, I think that he would have preferred to take the position he took, in being that he just called up the stairs, as opposed to like having to break it to his mother and father that
he left them.
He left them, and that he knows that they were there and that they burned to death, because I just feel like he couldn't. He carried a tremendous amount of guilt, no doubt. Anybody would.
I don't know what it is about John Sauter and John Walsh and all the stories that these guys use over the years. But I say this, when it comes to children's deaths, incredibly difficult to deal with. And I think the stages of grief are multiplied exponentially when it's children who die.
Right. And he was 23, and the other siblings were like 14, 12, 10, 8, and 6. So, I mean, that's definitely, he was old enough to grasp that and realize it.
There's probably some guilt as the oldest sibling that maybe it was his responsibility to make sure they were okay, and he felt like he failed, and he didn't want that to become something that his family blamed him for.
Yeah, I don't see why he didn't pick up one of the littler kids, and I think he went into the boys' room. I don't think we can
put that on him, though.
No. But I'm saying I think he went into. So the smallest girl was 6, and so what I understand is there were 2 rooms, and I assume it was a boys' room and a girls' room. And so he probably went in the boys' room, and the boys were like 10 and 14, and so that's not somebody you would pick up, right? They're too big to be carried, but. I assume he went in there and tried to get them up, and they just, it was the middle of the night and they were tired and they just couldn't be roused. And I feel like he really did have to make a snap decision. Am I going to try and wake up the girls, or do I get out? And he probably thought, well, if I die, nobody can help them anyway. So I need to get out so I can get help. And unfortunately, there wasn't help to be had.
This one is one of those cases that it gets put out there as an unsolved mystery, but then it gets put out there as an unsolved cold case.
But it's not. And I feel like that's wrong.
I wonder if they couldn't use, and I know she died this year, and this is terrible to even suggest it, but I'm just going to throw it out there. I wonder if they couldn't use Sylvia's DNA to run it against, like, 123andMe, or you know what I'm saying, like running against Ancestry.
You mean doing it like forensic genealogy to see if any of these kids reproduced?
Correct.
Yeah, there's grandchildren, so it could still be done.
I'm just saying, like, that would be one way to solve it. Like, if you could trace it all back to one of the surviving siblings and it doesn't show up anywhere as more grandchildren or more children, then...
Well, yeah, because you could figure out so what you would be looking for is, it would be a certain degree, because see, up to a certain degree, it would still be possible, because we know that the father at least had at least one brother that came over with him, right?
Well, he went back.
Correct, but I mean, GEDmatch is not a strictly...
I'm just saying, you could, like, just doing this would be a reverse investigation.
Correct, and so
familial...
You would be looking for anything that would indicate cousins from the children who are deceased or missing, right? You'd be looking for their offspring. And so you would be looking for this like 25%, and you would look for nothing more than a 25% match to one of the known grandchildren. That's what you're looking for.
Got it.
And so in doing that, it would establish... it would say, well, if they did live, they didn't have any kids. That's essentially what that would establish, at least to the degree where it's been said by experts recently that the DNA profiles available would identify everybody to an extent. So
this would be an interesting one to dig at, since you have multiple examples, but you have multiple...
I would say that if they were
same pile.
If they were alive, it would be really hard for me to believe that one of the 5 didn't have children.
Absolutely.
But I also find it really hard to believe that, a 14-year-old, if let's say they were kidnapped or whatever, like, he would just come back home.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot sort of there, and I see, the family grieving, and it's very sad. But I think you could probably, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the fact that there was a fire and that was clearly probably what happened, I'm not sure the forensic genealogy would actually convince anybody of anything. You see what I'm saying? Because it's already so blatantly clear I'm not sure that just saying well, if they are alive, they didn't have any kids, they could still possibly think. But what if it showed that there were kids, though? I think that would be the thing that would really turn the case around.
Well, then you could start tracking it back. And if you could prove one of them was alive, then some of this other stuff looks less conspiratorial.
Right. And they probably wouldn't be alive now, though. That would be the thing. But you could get at least as much information as possible. But that is what I think. So if that were to be done, I feel like that is what a conclusion, at least, that, hey, they really were alive past that point. But I don't necessarily want to do, I don't actually think that would happen. I feel like they died in the fire, and, I hope they are all resting in peace. And by this point, because Sylvia died, the youngest died this year, they all know exactly what happened, I would hope.
That's all I have on the Sodder family. Anything else from you?
That'll do it.
I do want to say that I got a message this morning from Mark Dean. His wife, Jerry Dean, has been running the website Missing Persons of America for a very long time. It's been a pretty important site. She has done a lot of work for missing persons cases, mainly in the Southeast United States, but really all over. And I did get a message that she passed away last night from cancer. So I wanted to send good thoughts out to her. If you're inclined, they do have a GoFundMe on the Missing Persons of America Facebook page. And I think it's it had been to cover her cancer expenses, and I believe now it'll be to cover her funeral expenses. But she will be missed. Rest in peace. Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabbratiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabbratiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.